It was supposed to be a quiet retreat, one of Hollywood's biggest stars slipping into paradise without fanfare. But when the resort staff didn't recognize Michael B. Jordan and treated him like a second-class citizen, what followed wasn't just shocking, it was explosive. A simple request for a towel turned into an all-out confrontation that ended with security dragging him in front of stunned guests. But when the truth came out, it didn't just shake the resort. It shattered lives, careers, and exposed something far more sinister beneath the palm trees and champagne. What happens when the wrong man gets humiliated, and the world is watching? The sun melted over the horizon as a private jet touched down quietly at Montego Bay's secluded airstrip. Michael B. Jordan stepped off the plane without an entourage, no flashing cameras, no red carpets. Just a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a deep exhaustion in his eyes. He had turned down invitations to Cannes, passed on a lucrative endorsement shoot, and cancelled 3 meetings with producers. All he wanted was silence. He booked the luxury island resort under a different name, Devon Carter, and had no plans of being recognized. It wasn't a stunt, just a desperate attempt to remember what peace felt like. But from the moment the shuttle picked him up, something felt off. The driver offered a forced smile that never reached his eyes. At check-in, the clerk barely looked up and seemed annoyed when Michael asked about the oceanfront upgrade he had reserved. "You sure you're in the right place, sir?" she asked. Michael chalked it up to rudeness, the kind that sometimes trails people who work too long in customer service. He let it go. But by the next morning, the pattern became undeniable. White guests were greeted with champagne and cold towels while he waited 20 minutes for someone to notice him at the breakfast bar. A pool attendant took one look at him and muttered something under his breath in patois. Another guest, a retired businessman from New York, clapped him on the back and said, "Hey, brother, staff entrance is around the side," before laughing and walking off. Michael kept his cool, brushing off the unease with headphones and meditation, determined not to ruin his rare solitude. But even when he retreated to the spa, the hostess glanced at his reservation and then said flatly, "Sorry, walk-ins only today." Behind her, he saw a couple ushered in without hesitation. The atmosphere, once pristine and luxurious, began to take on a strange weight. He noticed how the only other black guests were herded into less desirable seating, given slower service, or ignored entirely. Then he spotted Malik. Young, maybe 19, clearly a local working summers to save money. Their eyes met briefly one afternoon as Michael walked the beach alone, and Malik gave him a faint nod, a kind of silent recognition. Michael nodded back. There was a quiet understanding exchanged between them, the kind that transcends words. Malik kept his head down and moved with urgency, like he was afraid of being seen helping too much. That night, Michael returned to his suite to find it had not been cleaned. No towels. No water. The minibar emptied. And a note on the door that simply read, "We've had complaints about your presence. Management will be reviewing your stay." He stared at it for a full minute before folding it and slipping it into his pocket. This wasn't just about customer service anymore. There was a message in the neglect. A challenge in the silence. And as the sun set on his 3rd day, Michael realized something that chilled him more than the ocean breeze. They didn't just not know who he was, they didn't care who he was. To them, he was simply a black man who didn't belong. By the 4th day, the insult was no longer in the tone, it was in the policy. Michael's keycard mysteriously stopped working, locking him out of his suite under the brutal midday sun. Shirtless, dripping with seawater and sand, he stood at the front desk as the young receptionist squinted at the name Devon Carter and scrolled slowly through the guest list. A line formed behind him, and a white couple was waved forward and checked in without delay. When Michael politely objected, the manager on duty stepped in, looking down his nose and saying, "Sir, if you don't lower your voice, I'll be forced to ask security to intervene." Michael hadn't raised his voice once. The humiliation burned hotter than the tropical heat, but he bit his tongue and handed over his ID, resisting the urge to drop the name that would fix all of this in seconds. That was never the point. He didn't want respect because he was famous, he wanted dignity because he was human. But at this resort, it seemed the two were mutually exclusive. Later that afternoon, things took a darker turn. As Michael sat poolside sipping a watered-down cocktail, A middle-aged man in a linen shirt approached and leaned in with a condescending grin. "You do work here, don't you? Because if you're not going to clear my plates, I'll get someone who will." Michael froze, stunned at the casual venom. When he didn't move, the man rolled his eyes and clapped for a staff member, saying, "Some of them just get lazy when they see how easy the jobs are." The waiter who came to collect the plates gave Michael an apologetic glance, but said nothing. Nobody ever said anything. That same evening, a group of resort security guards trailed Michael through the property under the guise of routine patrols, whispering into radios as he moved from the bar to the garden. When he paused to take a photo of the sunset, one guard stepped in front of him, blocking the view, and said, "Guests only past this point." Michael, tired of the games, calmly responded, "I am a guest." The guard scoffed and demanded to see his keycard. Again. It had been reactivated by then, but the guard took an uncomfortably long time studying it before handing it back with a shrug. No apology, just suspicion, tightly wrapped in thin professionalism. Inside the kitchen, things weren't much better for Malik. He had noticed the man the first day, tall, confident, clearly American. But Malik also noticed something else, how the other staff whispered about him. They referred to Michael as the loud one, even though Malik had never once heard him raise his voice. They joked that he probably got the room with stolen points. One supervisor muttered that he looked like he snuck in from town, and another warned new hires to keep an eye on him, "He has that vibe." Malik knew what they meant. He knew because he had grown up with that same tone aimed at his father, who was once mistaken for a landscaper at a beach wedding simply for wearing khakis. Malik tried to stay invisible, blending in, staying silent, but each injustice he witnessed twisted tighter in his chest. At one point, he tried slipping Michael a fresh towel after witnessing him get denied one by the pool. He was quickly reprimanded by his superior, "We don't serve walk-ins towels unless they have VIP wristbands." Malik didn't argue. He just nodded and backed away, the towel still in his hand. One night, Michael wandered into the resort's high-end steakhouse, craving something more than the cold reception he'd received all week. The hostess glanced up, her smile faltering when she saw him. "Reservation?" she asked, though the dining room was half empty. He gave his name, his real name, and watched her expression shift from skepticism to confusion. "Hold on," she said, vanishing into the back. When she returned, a large man in a suit was with her, head of guest services, a man who had never introduced himself until now. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but this area is reserved for premium club members tonight," he said smoothly. Michael was ready to leave, but another guest behind him, a loud investment banker from Texas, interrupted. "You're kicking him out? Don't you know who that is? That's Michael B. Jordan, man." The manager stiffened. The hostess went pale. Silence fell. The damage was done. Michael turned, face unreadable, and walked out. He said nothing. That moment should have triggered apologies, explanations, offers of compensation. Instead, it triggered fear. Within an hour, staff scrambled to review footage, compare names, and verify they hadn't just insulted a global superstar. They had. Malik overheard frantic whispers in the break room. "Are we gonna get sued? He's probably filming this for some show. How did nobody recognize him?" But the deeper question went unspoken. Why did it take realizing his celebrity for them to acknowledge his mistreatment? Not his humanity. Not his dignity. Just his fame. Back in his suite, Michael stared out at the ocean, fists clenched around the note he had found earlier that day slipped under his door. This time, it read, "Management reserves the right to protect the experience of our exclusive guests." No signature. Just the resort's logo embossed in gold. Michael folded it again, slipped it beside the first, and exhaled. His silence was not weakness. It was strategy. The storm hadn't hit yet, but it was coming. The sky was mercilessly blue on the day everything snapped. Tourists basked in the sun, sipping cocktails and snapping selfies, as if the world had never known cruelty. Michael sat in a lounge chair at the edge of the infinity pool, sunglasses on, earbuds in, the ocean humming quietly in the background. His silence was deceptive, a calm before the reckoning. Though outwardly composed, Inside him surged a steady storm of humiliation, disbelief, and righteous fury. He had endured slights, sneers, and outright hostility for days. He had been mistaken for staff, refused service, and followed like a threat on his own vacation. But when he reached for a chilled towel from the VIP basket beside him, one reserved for premium-tier guests, the reaction was instantaneous. A staff member he hadn't seen before, a tall, broad man with a red security badge, strode toward him and yanked the towel from his hand without warning. "This area's for guests who actually paid for access," he said, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. Michael stood up slowly. "I am a guest," he said, calmly but firmly. The man scoffed and pointed toward the front desk. "Then show proof, or I'll have you removed. We've had complaints." Michael didn't move. All around them, heads turned. Phones were raised. The sun glinted off lenses. A woman whispered to her husband, "Wait, is that?" But before anything else could happen, 2 more security guards arrived, one gripping a radio, the other cracking his knuckles. The first man stepped closer to Michael, chest puffed, the towel still clenched in his hand like a symbol of some absurd power. "Let's not make a scene," he muttered. Michael removed his sunglasses. He looked each guard in the eye. "The scene's already made," he said quietly. And then the chaos began. One guard reached for his arm. Michael stepped back. Another lunged, slipping slightly on the wet concrete, grabbing the back of Michael's shirt. Guests gasped as the actor twisted away instinctively, muscles tensing in defense but refusing to strike back. A child screamed. A woman dropped her mimosa. Malik, walking nearby with a tray of drinks, froze in place as he saw it unfold. The crowd was no longer murmuring, they were filming. Security wrestled with Michael in full view of tourists and locals alike, and in the scuffle, someone knocked over a table, sending glasses crashing to the ground. "Get off me!" Michael shouted, finally shoving one of the guards away hard enough to send him stumbling backward. And then came the silence. The manager burst through the patio doors, her face pale. "Stop," she yelled. "Stop. What the hell is going on?" One guard, red-faced and winded, barked, "He's not a registered VIP, he was trespassing." The manager turned to Michael, her lips parting in recognition. "Wait, but it was too late. The damage was irreversible." Michael reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He handed her his ID, his reservation, his VIP access confirmation, all under the name Devon Carter. She read it in trembling silence. "I'm sorry," she stammered. This is a huge mistake." Michael took a long breath. "No," he replied. "This is your culture." The footage hit social media within the hour. 3 different angles. Unedited. Crystal clear audio. The takedown of a world-famous actor at a 5-star resort over a towel. The hashtags exploded. #Michael B. Jordan, #racist resort, #do you know who I am. Celebrities began reposting it. Activists, journalists, influencers, it spread like fire on dry leaves. By sunset, the resort's official Instagram page had shut down, flooded with comments demanding accountability. Emails were leaked. The resort's internal memo labeled the event a misunderstanding, but the public wasn't buying it. News outlets picked it up. Headlines screamed across screens. "Racism in Paradise. Michael B. Jordan assaulted by resort staff in Jamaica." Michael hadn't spoken publicly yet, and that silence made it worse for the resort. The longer he waited, the more people imagined what he might say. The speculation became part of the punishment. Back behind the scenes, panic ruled. Management scrambled to locate body cam footage, security reports, anything that might shift blame away from them. Lawyers were called in. Staff were instructed not to speak to media. Malik was pulled aside and warned, "You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. If anyone asks, say you weren't there." He nodded like a good employee. But inside, something had broken. He had watched a man, calm, decent, respectful, treated like a criminal because of his skin. Because he didn't demand to be recognized. Because he had the audacity to exist in a space they believed he didn't belong. And Malik had done nothing to stop it. Michael sat alone in his room that evening, his back sore, his spirit heavier than ever. The ocean was still outside. The air was warm and sweet with salt. But something in him had turned cold. He opened his laptop, clicked on a blank document, and began to write, not a statement for the press, not a legal notice, just a letter. To himself. To the next black man who'd check into a resort with good intentions. To the boy who'd grown up believing success could shield him. To the millions watching and waiting to see what he would do next. By dawn, the story had consumed the internet like a tidal wave devouring a sandcastle. Every corner of social media buzzed with outrage, disbelief, and fury. A-list celebrities tweeted their support, demanding justice. Unacceptable, wrote Viola Davis. Disgusting behavior, added Jamie Foxx. Even outlets that usually avoided celebrity drama jumped in. The New York Times, The Guardian, even Al Jazeera. The headlines weren't subtle. Hollywood star assaulted in Caribbean paradise. The resort's name was now synonymous with disgrace, dragged through the mud in multiple languages. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. #Justice for Michael, #Not Your Paradise, #Racism is anti-luxury. Comment sections overflowed with calls for boycotts, legal action, and criminal charges. The resort's executives were caught completely off guard. They had faced weather delays, plumbing issues, even a local protest once, but never this. Never a scandal so visible, so viral, and so personal. In a desperate bid to contain the blaze, the board summoned the CEO, Richard Talbot, from London. A sharp-featured man with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for brutal efficiency. Talbot flew in on a private jet that same evening. The moment he landed, he bypassed pleasantries and headed straight for the security room. He watched the footage, raw, undeniable. No soundstage. No misunderstanding. Just a man being dragged like a trespasser from a pool his money helped finance. Talbot didn't speak as the video played. When it ended, he sat in silence for a moment, then said, "We're not dealing with a PR crisis. We're dealing with a moral failure." But that realization came late. Staff were already deleting comments from their pages. Front desk clerks were fielding threatening phone calls. Investors were pulling out. Travel bloggers were pulling partnerships. Room cancellations flooded the system. The resort was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Inside the break rooms and back hallways, fear hung thicker than humidity. Staff whispered about lawsuits, firings, jail time. Several of the guards involved in the incident hadn't shown up for their shifts since the video aired. Others were seen packing bags, muttering about going back to the mainland. Management clamped down hard. Phones were banned on shift, all communication monitored, and a strict gag order placed on everyone. But fear does strange things to loyalty. It was only a matter of time before someone cracked. That someone was Malik. 4 days, he'd carried guilt like a second uniform. He'd watched, he'd heard, he'd stayed silent. But something in him had changed. He couldn't unsee Michael's expression as he was dragged across that deck, humiliation cloaked in quiet rage. And when Malik found himself in the staff lounge with 3 supervisors joking about the incident, calling it overblown, and suggesting Michael was probably just looking for attention, the line inside him snapped. That night, Malik retrieved an old phone he used for music. It still had voice recording capabilities. The next day, he slipped it into his apron and let it run. He captured everything. Managers mocking guests, referencing a watch list of black and brown visitors labeled as high risk for theft or aggression, even a shocking joke about the incident itself. If he hadn't been famous, nobody would have cared, one voice laughed. Another added, "He's lucky we didn't press charges." The recordings weren't just damning, they were radioactive. Malik didn't leak them online. Instead, he sent them directly to Michael's team. A private email. No demand for money. No name attached. Just one line. "I was there. I'm sorry. This is the truth." Within hours, Michael's legal counsel contacted the resort. Now they weren't just dealing with video footage, they were facing internal recordings, proof of systemic racial profiling, discriminatory practices, and calculated cover-ups. The resort's board went into meltdown mode. Talbot tried negotiating behind closed doors, offering Michael a public apology, free stays, a donation to a racial equity nonprofit. But nothing landed. Michael remained silent. That silence became more powerful than any tweet. News anchors speculated on his next move. Pundits debated the legal implications. Tourism ministers in the region begged for a statement to ease the economic fallout. But still, nothing. No comment. No interview. Just a storm cloud hovering over paradise built on image and illusion. Meanwhile, Malik lived in limbo. Each day, he came to work unsure if he'd be fired, arrested, or both. But he also felt something else. Clarity. He had done the right thing, even if no one thanked him for it. One afternoon, as he swept the corridor outside the spa, a woman brushed past him and whispered, "You're brave." He didn't recognize her. Maybe a guest. Maybe someone who knew what he had done. But it stayed with him. And later that night, when he got a message from an unknown number that simply said, "Thank you for your courage." His hands shook for a long time. The tide was turning, but nobody knew yet just how far it would pull them under. The media frenzy churned on, a swirling cyclone of outrage, speculation, and partial truths. In the quiet corridors of the resort, where the scent of eucalyptus oil masked the stench of fear, the staff walked on eggshells. Malik moved like a ghost, still on shift, still wearing his uniform, but changed. Something inside him had crystallized into a sense of purpose, a clarity that sharpened his every step. He kept his head down, but his ears open. Whispers passed between staff like contraband. Who was being questioned, who got suspended, who might be next. But nobody spoke about what really mattered. Nobody talked about the rot beneath the resort's polished surface, the unspoken code that deemed some guests more deserving of dignity than others. Until now. The day the email from Michael's legal team hit the executive inbox, panic turned to pandemonium. The recordings Malik had sent confirmed what the footage had only suggested. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. And worse, it was sanctioned. Embedded. Malik had captured conversations in the staff lounge, on walkie channels, and during back-office meetings where managers joked about needing to weed out the wrong crowd. These weren't rogue comments, they were standard operating procedure. What started as a PR nightmare now looked like the foundation of a class action lawsuit. Human rights attorneys took interest. Civil liberties organizations published statements. The Caribbean Tourism Board issued a public rebuke. The resort's stock price dipped for the first time in years. Malik was summoned to the general manager's office under the pretense of a routine check-in. The atmosphere was heavy with faux concern. "We just want to make sure you're okay," the manager said, his smile stretched too tight. "There's been a lot of noise lately." Malik nodded, heart pounding. "You haven't spoken to anyone outside about what's going on, right?" the manager asked, his voice silk over razors. Malik shook his head. "Of course not." The lie was like swallowing glass. He left the meeting with a warning echoing in his ears. Loyalty is remembered. So is betrayal. It was a threat disguised as wisdom, and it only deepened his resolve. That evening, Malik's phone buzzed with a blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. A calm, familiar voice said, "You have 10 minutes. It was Michael. Not a lawyer. Not a rep, Michael himself. The call was short, but powerful. Michael didn't ask why Malik had come forward, he thanked him for doing it. He told him he didn't see him as a whistleblower, but as someone who saw the humanity in a moment when everyone else chose to look away. Malik didn't speak much. His voice trembled. But when he hung up, something shifted. The silence that had protected his fear was replaced with a quiet courage. The next morning, Malik walked into the HR office with a USB drive and a letter. The letter was simple, a full account of everything he had witnessed since his first day at the resort. The drive contained the original recordings, including a conversation from weeks prior where senior supervisor outlined a system for flagging problem guests, most of whom, not coincidentally, were minorities. The HR representative stared at him, eyes wide, unsure whether to thank him or call security. Malik left before she could decide. Within the hour, copies of the letter and the files were in the hands of Michael's team, a civil rights watchdog group, and 2 major news outlets. There was no turning back. The fallout was immediate. A second wave of media coverage erupted, this time more explosive than the first. Headlines screamed, "Whistleblower exposes resort's racial profiling blueprint." Malik's identity was kept private, but his words rang out across screens and feeds. His letter included the line, "You don't have to be the one getting dragged to be part of the injustice. Sometimes, watching it happen and staying quiet is just as dangerous." The quote went viral. Celebrities reposted it. Teachers printed it out and taped it to classroom walls. The resort's board convened an emergency session. Executives were suspended. Internal audits began. Michael still hadn't spoken publicly, but now, the world didn't need him to. His silence had become a megaphone for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong in a place they had paid to enter. Meanwhile, Malik's life changed in subtle ways. Notes appeared in his locker, some anonymous, some brave enough to sign their names. "Thank you. You did the right thing. You're not alone." But not everyone was supportive. Some co-workers stopped talking to him. Others gave him the cold shoulder, angry that his truth had cost them their illusion of peace. Malik understood. Change doesn't arrive gently. It drags the dust into the light. But as he watched the tides shift, saw the press helicopters circling, and overheard staff now scrambling to rewrite policies they'd once mocked, he knew the silence was broken, for good. Somewhere deep inside the resort, the echo of that broken silence settled into its walls like a permanent scar, a reminder that someone had finally spoken when it mattered most. 2 months later, the Caribbean sun rose on a very different resort. The once bustling paradise now moved like a ghost town with a fresh coat of paint. The logo had been updated. The website scrubbed. Management overhauled. A new inclusion and hospitality initiative had been launched, complete with stock images of smiling, diverse guests and glowing copy about healing through accountability. But underneath the marketing, the wounds were still raw. The story had not faded, it had only evolved. New lawsuits were pending. Former employees were cooperating with investigations. Travel influencers boycotted the property entirely. But no one expected what came next. No one expected Michael to return. He didn't arrive with cameras. No press. No entourage. Just a linen shirt, dark sunglasses, and the same quiet energy that had been so misread the first time. This time, the staff recognized him before he even reached the front steps. The bellhop froze mid-step. The manager on duty turned ghost white. But Michael didn't stop to address them. He walked past the reception desk without speaking, cutting through the lobby like a shadow of judgment. He stopped at the same pool where it had all unraveled, the edge of that infinity line where laughter had once turned to gasps. A group of new employees were being trained nearby. They stared at him with a mix of awe and confusion. They had all heard the story. The man in front of them had changed the trajectory of the entire resort without raising his voice or lifting a hand. Minutes later, the newly appointed general manager, a woman named Clarissa Haynes, approached him cautiously. "Mr. Jordan," she began, "we didn't know you were coming." He turned to face her, expression unreadable. "I didn't come to stay," he said. "I came to finalize some paperwork." She hesitated. "Paperwork?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a leather folder. Inside were signed documents, ownership transfer papers. Not partial shares. Full acquisition. The resort's founding owners, embarrassed and under pressure, had quietly sold the property to a private group weeks earlier. That group, it turned out, was a shell company with one investor, Michael B. Jordan. He didn't want the resort's name. He didn't want the headlines. What he wanted was control. Clarissa blinked in disbelief. "You bought the resort?" she asked, voice catching. Michael nodded. "I'm not here to fire people," he said. "I'm here to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, ever again." Word spread within minutes. Staff gathered behind columns, peeking from hallways, whispering in disbelief. Malik, who had quietly left the resort weeks ago to avoid the growing tension, received a call from an unknown number that morning. It was a simple message. "Come by the pool. There's something you need to see." He arrived just as Michael stood addressing the leadership team. There was no podium, no speechwriter, just a man speaking plainly. "This place broke something in me," he said. "But it also gave me a reason to do more than just walk away. I came back to rebuild it. Not in my image, but in the image of who we say we want to be." Malik stood in the back, uncertain. Michael spotted him, nodded once. That was all it took. Clarissa turned and said, "You're Malik, right?" He nodded slowly. "You're the reason we're still standing," she said. "Would you consider coming back?" Malik hesitated. "Depends on what I'd be coming back to." Michael smiled. "Not a job," he said. "A voice." In the days that followed, changes came fast. Every staff member underwent training, not the corporate kind, but immersive sessions led by activists, hospitality reform experts, and people who had experienced bias firsthand. Policies were rewritten. The watch list was destroyed. Hiring practices overhauled. Michael refused to rename the resort in his own honor. Instead, he named it after something else, Eden Restored. But the most powerful transformation wasn't the rebranding or the training. It was the silence that followed. Not the silence of shame, but the kind of reverent quiet that comes after a storm has passed and left something stronger in its wake. Guests started returning, drawn by the strange, beautiful irony. A place once defined by exclusion had become a sanctuary for dignity. Michael never posted about his purchase. He never gave interviews. He didn't need to. The world already knew. His actions spoke louder than 1,000 captions. Malik was promoted to head of guest services. He implemented a program that invited young locals to train in hospitality and leadership, ensuring the future of the resort looked different from its past. And still, not everything was spoken aloud. Guests often wondered why a framed towel, plain white, slightly frayed, hung behind the reception desk in a shadow box. No plaque. No explanation. But those who knew, knew. It was the towel Michael had reached for the day it all went wrong. It was no longer a symbol of status or restriction. It was a monument to a moment that could have been buried but wasn't. A reminder that sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's a man returning not for revenge, but for redemption. And sometimes, the most powerful transformation doesn't come from speaking, but from deciding never to be silent again.